Do you think that the format of the baseball playoffs is a bit messed up and needs some tweaking? Check out this video and let's explore how we might go about doing that. What is going on, everybody? Thanks for joining me on my channel, Brutus on Baseball, once again. Today, I'm here to talk all about the Major League Baseball playoff structure. There's been a lot of scrutiny this year about this topic because some of the best teams in the league, the Atlanta Braves, Los Angeles Dodgers, and Baltimore Orioles with the best records in baseball, were some of the first ones to go home, some of those being swept by lower-ranked teams. And a lot of people are talking that they think this is because of the bye round, the fact that the best teams get a bye in the first round of the playoffs. Before we jump into that too quickly, let's go over a little bit of history. I've actually got a whole video where I talked about the evolution of the playoff structure over time, and I'll link that below so you can check that out as well. But to give a brief overview, there were only two teams that made the postseason between 1903 and 1968. The best team of the American League, the best team in the National League would get together and play each other in a 7-game World Series. In the 1960s, there was a lot of expansion, so the playoffs expanded from 2 teams to 4 teams, 2 in each league, from 1969 until 1993. And then with more expansion in the 90s, the baseball playoffs were expanded once again in 1994 to 8 teams. 4 teams per league. So now there were multiple series to decide who would represent the American League and National League in the World Series. Once again, the playoffs expanded in 2012 to 10 teams, 5 teams in each league. And with an odd number of teams in each league, there had to be that wild card play-in game, a 1-game winner takes all, loser goes home to decide which final team gets into the playoff series. That format lasted from 2012 until 2021. When the new CBA negotiated between Major League Baseball and the Players Union, expanded the playoffs once again to 12 teams, the current format that we're in right now. And in this format, there's now 3 wildcard teams, and there's a wildcard series, which is a best of 3 instead of a 1-game play-in. And as a result of this, the best 2 teams in each league get a bye in the first round and have to wait for those best of 3 series to figure out who they're going to play. This ends up in those best teams getting up to 5 days off, which can be really difficult when you've played 7 straight months of baseball almost every day of the week, and then suddenly you're asked to wait 5 days to play your first playoff series. And a lot of people are talking that this turns those teams cold. So let's dig into this just a little bit to see why that's a question. In 2022, the Yankees and the Astros were the best teams in the American League, and the Braves and Dodgers were the best teams in the National League. Now, the American League Championship Series was the Yankees versus the Astros, so the best 2 teams made it. But the National League Championship Series was the Phillies against the Padres. So that means the 2 best teams in the National League were eliminated in the first series after their bye. Now, in 2023, the second year that we're doing this, the best teams in the American League were the Orioles and the Astros again. And in the National League, it was the Braves and Dodgers once again as well. This time around, the American League Championship Series was the Rangers versus the Astros. So again, the Astros, the only team out of the top 2 to make it through. And the National League Championship Series pits the Phillies against the Diamondbacks. So once again, the Braves and Dodgers were eliminated in their first series after the bye. Maybe this is just a problem that the Braves and Dodgers have, or maybe it says something a little bit more. But that means in 2023, we're watching the 4 best teams not playing in the World Series. In 2022, the World Series pitted the number 1 seed in the American League against the number 6 seed in the National League. And in 2023, it'll feature the number 5 in the American League against the number 6 seed in the National League. So we're not necessarily seeing the top teams get through in the 2 years of data that we have. Now, admittedly, this is a very small sample size, which is why Major League Baseball is not rushing to make any changes. They're going to sit back and watch this one out a little bit and see if it becomes a recurring problem. But is it a coincidence that we're not consistently seeing the best teams in each league advance in the first 2 years of the playoff structure? Are the 2022 Phillies or the 2023 Rangers really that bad of a team? Sure, they're ranked in the wild card category, but the Rangers tied the Astros this year in 1-loss record, and the Phillies, a really strong team as well. Some of the managers of the best teams have come out to say that having a couple days of rest before their first series is a great benefit, to give some pitchers a little bit more time off, to get their hitters a little bit of rest. But having 5 days off leaves them a little bit cold and might be a little bit too much. So what's the solution? First of all, let's look at a few poll questions I put up on my Instagram account to gather some information from baseball fans out there. Our first and most obvious question, do people like the amount of teams that are playing in the postseason? The majority of respondents in this poll question actually like the current format with 6 teams. They've accepted the expanded playoffs are a necessary part of the future because the owners love the additional profits. And there's fewer respondents that will like the old way of only 4 teams per league or want to expand even further to 8 teams per league. Now, the next question was whether the wild card series, the first series, should be a 1-game play-in, a 3-game series, or a 5-game series. This one seemed to be evenly split between the wild card being a 1-game play-in and a 3-game series, which it currently is right now. And very few people wanted to see it expand to a 5-game series, which would just lengthen the baseball playoffs further into November and would cause the best teams that have the byes an even longer stretch of waiting. The next question was, do fans actually think that the first round bye hurts the best teams? And this one was evenly split. About the same number of people thought that yes, it does hurt the teams, or no, it doesn't. So the jury is really out on this one. And I think that's the same position that Major League Baseball sees itself in. They're not quite sure, but it's important enough to take a look at so they're not caught with doing nothing if it does become an obvious problem. The next question is, how should the playoff teams be seeded? With 6 teams in each league now, it's a little bit complicated who gets the number 1 seed and who gets the number 6. And as it stands, the top 3 seeds are given to the 3 division winners in each league. And the wildcard teams, 4 through 6, are sorted based on their 1-loss record for that season. The responses here were evenly split, with half the people thinking that the seeding should be kept the same. Division winners get the 1 through 3 slots and the wildcards 4 through 6. But the other half thought that the playoffs should be seeded based on 1-loss record only, so it doesn't matter which division you played in or if you won the division or not. And I actually like this idea better. Using 2023 as an example, it becomes quite important because the best teams in the league were the Baltimore Orioles and the Tampa Bay Rays. The Orioles were ranked number 1 in the seeding, but because the Rays didn't win their division, they were ranked number 4, the best of the wild card teams. Whereas the Twins won their Central Division, a very weak division, but they got the number 3 seed because they won the division. But if we only looked at 1-loss record, the Twins would actually have been the worst team and gotten the number 6 seed. We're going to think about this one a little bit more later on, but it's a really good question to ask. Should the winner in a poor division really be given the number 3 seed? Or should they be put at the bottom, especially considering that the American League East had some really great and strong teams, and the Rays and Orioles were able to have the best records even against that competition? My next question is simple. Should the wild card teams have a harder path to get to the World Series? And by far, the response was yes. If you only make it as a wild card, your path should be more difficult. But this response begs the question, does the current playoff format actually penalize the wildcard teams and give them the hardest path? The number 6 seed, the Phillies, was in the World Series last year, and there's the number 5 and 6 seeds that could potentially be playing in the World Series this year. Have we actually given the best teams in the league a disadvantage by giving them a bye in the first round of the playoffs? That's a question that we're going to examine a little bit more later on, and we're going to magnify just a little bit on whether the path for the number 6, number 5 team seeds should be a little bit harder than it even is right now. And the last question that I thought of throwing in there was, if your favorite team is a wild card, do you think it's fair for that team to be going home after losing only 1 game? And 3/4 of the voters here agreed that even for their favorite team, they would be fine going home after 1 game if their team was a wild card. There was a lot of talk in 2021 before the most recent baseball playoff changes that players of the wild card teams thought it was unfair to play a 1-game play-in after a 162-game season that would decide your fate. But this response shows that fans may not think that way. If you were only good enough to squeak in as a wild card, then maybe a 1-game play-in is fair enough. And I tend to think that as well. So putting all of these responses and some of my ideas together, I've come up with a solution that I'd like to throw into the mix for you guys to consider. Most people and Major League Baseball like having more teams in the playoffs, so no need to reduce it. 6 teams is great. Major League Baseball loves this idea too, because more games, more money, more exposure. So let's not mess with that. Major League Baseball actually pushed for 7 teams to be in the postseason in each league as part of their CBA they were negotiating in 2022. But having an odd number of teams in the postseason in each league would mean that only the best team in the league would get a bye, and the other 6 teams would be playing in the first series. And with these questions swirling, would that format have given the best team in the league the major disadvantage compared to all the other teams? Now, the disadvantage of a first-round bye for the best team could be fixed by pumping up the playoffs to 8 teams per league, but this would water down the quality in the playoffs even more. You'd have a 3-game series with the number 1 seed against the number 8 seed, and as we know in baseball, almost anything can happen in a 3-game series. I don't think fans want to see this many teams in the playoffs. You're going to end up with some teams hovering around 500 that are suddenly going to be making the playoffs. So personally, I don't like these ideas of expanding the playoffs very much, and I don't think most fans do either. So here's my idea. Number 1, keep the baseball playoffs at 6 teams per league. Number 2, re-rank the seeding in each league based on win-loss record only, not your division winners. If the Orioles and Rays are the best 2 teams in the American League, they get the number 1 and number 2 spot. Who cares if they were in the same division? The only exception to this is the division winner has to make the playoffs. So if we were going by a reseeding in 2023, the Minnesota Twins were actually the 7th best record, and the Seattle Mariners would have had the 6th best. But because the Twins won their division, they would get that number 6 spot, bumping the Mariners out. That's the only caveat that I would have to this reseeding idea. Number 3, the wild card game is a 1-game play-in. You lose, you go home. Most of the people that responded to my poll seem to support this idea. If your team ended up with the 6th best record in your league after 162 games, the fans seem to understand that it's a blessing to even make it to the postseason. And if you lose a game, you're out. If your team gets hot at the right time, then maybe you can run the board. But it's a long shot because of number 4. The problem is that there's too many teams making the playoffs to play just a 1-game play-in for the wild card. So let's make it a 2-game play-in. The number 5 seed and the number 6 seed square off in a 1-game elimination to see who moves on to play against the number 4 seed. In that game, the winner of the 5-6 seed and the 4 seed is also a 1-game elimination. So that makes it even harder for the 5 or 6 seed to move on because they have to play 2 elimination games. And it gives the number 4 team a slight advantage because they were able to take that 1 extra day of rest and maybe put their best pitcher up against the winner of the 5-6 seed game. But the result is after this round of elimination, you only have 1 team moving on from the number 4, 5, and 6 seeds. And therefore, you have 1 of the bottom 3 seeds and still all 3 top seeds ready to play in the next best of 5 series. It gives 1 of the lower teams a chance to run the board in the playoffs, which makes it harder for them to actually get there, which we can almost all agree should be the way it is. So that means only 3 days off for those teams waiting to find out who's coming out of the lower 3 seeds. That's 2 elimination games and 1 day of travel. And you have the wild card who ends up going against the number 1 team, and the number 2 and 3 team face off to decide who goes on to the league championship series. And how exciting would this be? 2 days, 3 teams, 2 games with 1 survivor. That is must-see baseball. The one hiccup that you may have thought of already is how can it only be a 3-day layoff if there's 3 teams, 2 games, and a travel? And you don't have a travel day between the first elimination game and the second elimination game. Well, that's simple. It's because the number 4 team has gained the honor of hosting the elimination series. That means the number 5 and number 6 teams play a game at a neutral park, hosted by the number 4 team. And whoever wins that game has to go the next day to play another elimination game. If you've gotten a good enough record to be ranked number 4, shouldn't you get that advantage as well and cut down on the required travel between games? If you barely squeaked into the playoffs, I don't think it's an issue to have that kind of disadvantage for my team. So what would this have actually looked like in 2023 if this were the playoff format? Well, in the American League, the Orioles, Rays, and Astros would have been ranked 1 through 3 and would have gotten a bye out of that elimination round. The Twins would have been the number 6 seed and would have played the number 5 seed, the Blue Jays, in Texas. Let's say the Twins would have beaten the Blue Jays. They would have then had to play against the Rangers in Texas the next day to decide who moves on to the next round. And it would have come out the Rangers against the Orioles and the Astros versus the Rays. I think we can all agree those would have been some great series to see who would actually move on from that group to the World Series. In the National League, it's even more obvious. The Braves, Dodgers, and Brewers would have been the top 3 teams not playing in the elimination round. The Arizona Diamondbacks would have played against the Marlins in Philadelphia to decide who goes on. Let's say the Diamondbacks would have won that. They would have then played against the Phillies in Philadelphia to decide who moves on to the next best of 5 series. Now that's the series that we're watching to decide who's going to go to the World Series. But if you ask me, and I think if you ask a lot of people, nobody really expected a Phillies Diamondbacks National League Championship Series to decide who goes to the World Series. We would have wanted to see somebody like the Dodgers or Braves at least playing at this stage of the playoffs. And so in this format, I think it would have worked better. Diamondbacks and Phillies, great game. Let's see which one of those teams deserves to move on. And with the Diamondbacks playing in Philly, for the purpose of this video, I'm going to assume that the Phillies would have won. So we would have had the Phillies against the Braves and the Brewers against the Dodgers. Once again, some great teams making the playoffs and not a bad group to decide a World Series representative from. Would this format have fixed everything? Well, it would have made the road for the Diamondbacks a lot more difficult. Perhaps the Diamondbacks fans would not be a supporter of this idea of the format, but I'm willing to bet that fans of the Rays, Orioles, Braves, and Dodgers probably would support this a little bit more, as well as fans that want to see the best teams play in the World Series. For me, the World Series is exciting no matter who makes it, but it's always just that much more exciting when I know that the best of the best teams are going head-to-head to decide who's going to be the champion. So there is my ideas on how to change the Major League Baseball playoff structure. Let me know what you think of my baseball playoff ideas in the comments below. If you love some of the ideas, let me know. If you hate it, let me know. Let's get the conversation going to see how we as baseball fans would change the playoff structure if we were in charge. Thanks again for joining me on my channel. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share it with anybody who loves baseball playoffs too. Until next time, keep talking baseball, and we'll see you around.